So the first thing I will say is that tonight's online class will run a little bit longer than I had originally planned, probably closer to the 1.5 hour mark, maybe just over. So of course, as always, you're welcome to drop in and out of the session as it suits you. I was going to stick to the 1 hour time frame, and then I thought, you know what, there is just honestly so much to cover, and instead of skipping out and dropping any of the content, let's just get through it and give you all of the hints and tips that I can to help you with assignment 3. Because that's obviously what tonight's online class is all about. So hopefully after tonight's class you'll feel like you've understood exactly what's required, have a decent plan in place as to how you're going to tackle it, and you'll know roughly what to go and research and what to come up with in terms of what to say in your presentation. So first thing I'll ask is, using the tick or cross button, who's excited for an oral presentation? How do you generally feel about oral presentations? And hey, if oral presentations aren't for you, you can give us a cross. It's alright. Everybody loves oral presentations. I know that some students say that they prefer doing a presentation as opposed to coming up with, you know, a written report or something like that. But hey, everybody's got their different favourites, don't they? What I can see though, for those of you that have responded, most of you are saying oral presentations are not your favourite thing. So 5 people are like, yep, I got this, and 8 people not so much. So interesting. Like I said before, it's not for everybody. Everyone's got their favourite assignments. Personally, I like assignments more than exams and presentations, but that's me. But tonight we're going to give you a lot of info, so buckle in, enjoy the ride for the next about hour and a half or so. But if you need to leave early, of course, that's absolutely fine, and we're recording it so you can catch up at the end. So let's start right from the beginning, talking about all the basics of what you need to know, which of course the first thing you need to know is that we're looking at a marketing mix pitch. So I'll use the word pitch and presentation and commingle the two of them tonight, but it is really framed as a pitch. In other words, you're pitching your new ideas. Presentations can sort of give people the impression that you're just presenting information and just going through the motions, but this really is a pitch, so it will be quite energetic. It's worth 30% of your grade, and of course the new due date that we're counting down to is next Friday afternoon. It's kind of unofficially the last day of the course, but at least the good thing is you've got about a week and a half to get this done, including, of course, this weekend. So hopefully you'll feel like you've got enough time to tackle this assignment, I guess. Alright, so basics, what you need to know is it's a 4-minute maximum pitch. So it's maximum. In other words, if you go over it, yes, there are going to be some penalties applied to you. It's generally a 10% penalty for a little bit over, and if you go, you know, double over, that's when we start to individually look at your grade. It's a continuation of assignment 1, which won't surprise you because we've talked about that many times before. But if you've got a really good reason for wanting to change your company or your brand from assignment 1, that's okay. Just send me a message, let me know. But for most of you, you're going to continue on with the same company. And with your pitch, you're going to be giving that directly to, or obviously imagining that you're giving that directly to like the CEO or the marketing officer, the marketing manager, board of directors. Okay, you can imagine that you're giving the pitch directly to them, which has the added advantage that you don't need to cover a lot of the basics. So, you know, they know things about the history of their company. You don't need to give us that basic information again, and you can just jump straight into the context for your ideas. But basically, you know, one of the approaches that I would suggest that you take for this assignment is that in your first assignment, you identified a problem or an opportunity. And so now assignment 3 is really all mostly focusing on, well, what's your solution? You know, what's your new marketing strategy so that this company can fix the problem that you identified earlier? It might not be a problem, It might be an opportunity that you might have just identified, but I think most of the assignments I read, it was sort of framed as a bit of a problem. So I'll use that word throughout most of tonight's session. But it's almost like you briefly reiterate what's the problem and focus most of your time and energy in the presentation on what is your solution in terms of your new marketing strategy. Of course, you're going to have to justify that, not just because this is an assignment, but because, as you'd imagine, in any business situation, you have to justify why are you suggesting the solution that you are. So there needs to be reasons, and for us, most of the reasons are going to be backing up from the course content and the theories, and also from some of the analysis that you've already done. We'll talk more about that later. But I guess in terms of the main content, you're just going to reiterate the problem. Don't have to go into a lot of depth on what the problem is, but just reiterate what the problem is to give a bit of a context. Then you're going to focus mostly on your new changes. So anything you suggest that you change, okay, specifically with regarding the marketing mix, that'll be the main focus. You'll tell us how do those changes satisfy your target market, and then really justify why the strategy is designed to achieve some objectives for the organization. And the objectives will be chosen by you as well. Okay. So at the end of the day, it's all about problem, solution, and why you're suggesting that solution. So it's a relatively straightforward way to think of your pitch, really. Okay, now bringing it back to something a little bit familiar, you might remember this slide from a few weeks ago. So we covered off the first half of this PowerPoint already, okay? And now, of course, we're going to focus on your new ideas, your new initiative, and it's really the idea of how are you going to get there, right? So we talked about what direction you might want to take, and some of you identified some really good future opportunities already. Now we're going to start going to specifics and explaining, really how are they going to actually, go through and identify the opportunities and ways that you will actually fix that. So giving you some suggestions in terms of structure, and tonight I'm going to go through each one of these and look at them independently. So again, I think tonight will be a longer than usual session. So as I said before, apologies if that's interfering with your plans. Please drop out at any time when it suits you, okay? All right, so before we even get to the content, okay, so before you sit down and you decide to write content, I need you to think first of all about what type of presentation you want to give. And I'm actually taking a really broad approach here and going to give you lots of different opportunities in terms of how you want to give your presentation, if you want to be on video, if you want to do a voiceover. But regardless of what type of opportunity you take, I think it really comes down to planning your presentation well, and your general pitch approach is what will help you to communicate your ideas well. So I'm going to invite your feedback here and ask you to think about some presentations that you've been to before. Now, probably we've all been to some good presentations and some not so good presentations. So let's do a bit of a brainstorm, and you can tell us here, what do you think makes a good presentation, and what have you seen in a dodgy presentation that obviously we want to avoid? Okay, so give you the opportunity now to write on screen, give us some ideas, and see if we can talk about any of the interesting ones that come up. So I'll stop talking for about a minute or so, see what we can come up with. Alrighty, I'm seeing some great responses here, and dare I say, I think there's actually more written here up on the slides in terms of what makes a dodgy presentation than a good one. Which, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's always a good idea to know what to avoid, definitely. So let's have a quick look. So let's start off on the good side. Alright, so I see a few people saying, you know, you need to be engaging. Definitely. And that can mean a few different things. It can mean, you know, making eye contact. It can mean asking questions. It can mean being responsive to the audience as well. Obviously it depends on the different context there. Free wine sounds pretty good. It might have just been a ploy to get you there in the first instance. Okay, I like these 2 points here in the middle, where we've got the point of simplicity and covering 3 areas. I mean, I like the idea of 3. Obviously, depends on time and context and what you have to cover and things like that. But I think the key point here is, you know, not covering too much, because obviously if you cover too much, you're going to confuse your audience. They're not going to remember it all anyway. There's always going to be limits to everybody's memory. So if you keep it simple and you've almost got one key message that you want the audience to remember, and even repeating that key message can often be quite good as well. Down here as well, captivating slides, images, and humor. Yes, humor can be used quite well. Obviously, some people think they're funny and they're not. I'm probably one of them. But, you know, if you can use it well and you can use it at the right time, if it's appropriate, it definitely adds to it. And my other favorite comment down here is know your material. And even, in fact, I'm going to link that up to you. One of you guys up the top said believe in it as well. Yeah, definitely. So if you know what you're saying, then you won't need to read off slides, which is a comment on the other side. And if you believe in it, then you will be passionate. You'll sound like you know what you're talking about as well. So, some things of what not to do. Oh my gosh, yes, don't read slides off of a PowerPoint. Anybody can, you know, why would you go to a presentation or watch somebody do that? You know, it's the most boring thing, as is reading off of a script. Definitely, definitely. I mean, even with your presentations, you have the option to, you know, use a PowerPoint with just a voiceover. So I don't necessarily have to see you on camera. Even then, I'm judging you based on your voice, your tone, how fast you talk, those sort of hints instead. And I can usually tell if you're reading off a script or if you're making it up as you go. You know, it does sort of tell. Usually, if you know roughly what you're going to say and you know enough of your material, you don't need a script. No eye contact as well, yes. If it's too long, yes. And all text, no pics. Yeah, so if you can add some good images that you think is going to actually add value to your presentation and it's going to be useful and interesting to the audience, then definitely include those. So I think this is actually a really good roundup. I can't really think of anything else to add, but we'll certainly go through that. But I guess it's just a really good lesson in what to avoid when you sit down to do your own presentation. And when planning your presentation, obviously we're going to aim for how to do a good one, all the tips on the left-hand side. But I think the key word there is when you're planning your presentation. And all too often, honestly, students will sit down, make PowerPoint slides and think that's planning a presentation. But usually my first step is actually to not sit down in PowerPoint and just start making slides, because if you do that, you've already jumped to what's in each slide and you haven't really stopped and thought about what the messages are that you're going to communicate. Alright, so I've mentioned PowerPoint a few times. You guys have mentioned PowerPoint a few times as well. So we obviously want to think about what kind of visuals we might be incorporating, but there's a few different options as I mentioned earlier. So you don't have to include video. Don't have to. You can if you want, if it's your kind of thing. Obviously, if you've got a relatively good camera that can film you. Even a phone camera these days is usually pretty good. But you can film yourself if you want to. In all honesty, most of the students that I mark choose option B, which is just doing a voiceover PowerPoint. You can also use other different technologies as well. You don't have to use PowerPoint. Another one that might be popular is Prezi. You can mix and match things up. Sometimes, I think last time I got one student that decided to make a short video and then have the rest as PowerPoint. And if that's not for you, you can go and have a look at some of the different cartoon type options where you create a cartoon and then do the voiceover for the cartoon. So there's lots of different options that you have available to you. But have a think about which one might suit you best. Give us a bit of an idea. Have a think about it now. A, B, C, D, or E, and use the polling option to give us an idea. And Nick, no, if you skip over if you choose not to include video, I'll just judge you on the other criteria. So mostly it's going to be your voice. All right. So just another couple of seconds. I see most of you have voted. Just another couple of seconds. I'm going to show you the graph on screen so you know what everyone else is thinking about doing. I mean, it's never a competition, but it's always good to know, I think anyway. Okay, so here you go. Here's a graph. This is what everyone else is planning on doing. How did I know? Option B. It's always the most popular. Yeah. Hey, if, like I said, if you want to do something different, PowerToon, something like that could be quite interesting. But yeah, I definitely say that the voice over the PowerPoint seems to be, honestly, it's the easiest, it's probably the quickest, and it accomplishes pretty much everything you need to do for the rubric. So I guess that's why most people do it. Paul says, do you include speaker notes with the PowerPoint presentation, or am I just going to judge the final output? Nope, I'll just judge the video or the PowerPoint with the voiceover that gets submitted, Paul. So there's no need to include a speech, script, nothing like that. Just the video. So you can certainly have a look on the course site, have a look at some of the other examples of students that we've included for you. But just remember that some of the examples, yes, they're from this course. They've had slightly different criteria before and different guidelines. So, you know, just definitely be mindful of that. Don't take it for gospel just because they did something, but more so pay attention to the presentation skills that we're showing you here. Has anyone had a look at those already? Just use the tick or cross button. There are 3 different examples incorporated. Okay, so yeah, some of you have, most of you have in fact. But the other thing I would suggest too is we've also linked there to some examples of Shark Tank pitches. So the TV show Shark Tank is where people generally go in and pitch a new business idea, you know, like a whole new business, which is not obviously exactly what you're doing, but you are still doing a pitch. And you're doing a pitch for some fairly new, hopefully interesting ideas. So the same skills apply, and on Shark Tank, at least in the Australian version, I think they have 2 minutes, I believe it is, to pitch their idea. So you've got like double that amount of time. It should be so much easier, right? But we have linked to that in the Assessment 3 section if you want to go and watch some of those as well. And if you find some good ones, some good Shark Tank pitches up on YouTube, then certainly post them up on Teams so we can all take a look. And I'll do the same. There's one that I absolutely loved on the Australian version of the show. A young girl, I think she was about 10 or 11. She did an amazing job. And she's actually been quite successful since then. So I'll find that one. I'll post up on Teams this week for you. All right, let me ask another question. Polling tool is still on the tick or cross option. Who here has ever pitched something before? Like you've done this in real life. You've done a real life business pitch or a pitch for a new idea. Okay, a fair few of you have, which is interesting. So I've got 12 saying yes and 7 saying no. So a few of you have, that's good. Well, hopefully you can draw upon that experience. But generally what I would say is a good pitch tells a bit of a story. And you don't want to be too straight down a list, like bang, 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 just sort of ticking off, covering all the points. But if you can build it into a bit of a story, it seems more natural. It will seem like you haven't got a lot of time because, let's be real, you've only got 4 minutes. But sometimes in other situations, you've got even less. And like I said before, really we are doing a pitch, not just a presentation. So a presentation is where you would go in and you would give the full, 45 minutes of every detail of what you're going to do. But here, we're looking for identifying how do all of your marketing ideas come together into the final product. So give us a little bit of an overview of lots of different sections, and then we'll judge how does it all come together. Does it make sense? So I mentioned earlier, you might want to take upon the sort of presentation strategy of what is the problem, and then how are you going to solve it. So that's what I would recommend, but if you've got other ways to present your ideas, then you go for that. And you might even want to think of coming up with a bit of a hook, or starting off your presentation with a question at the beginning. So, if you open with, what if I said to you today that, blah, 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 instead of just the usual, hi, my name's Sarah and I'm here to pitch my new idea for blah, blah, blah. Okay, you don't have to start off in that boring, broad sort of a way. You can be a little bit creative. Obviously, we're looking for things like that you know the content, that you have organized your presentation, you've rehearsed it, it's pretty clear, gets right to the point, has to be interesting, and because it is a pitch, we are trying to get you to persuade us to your idea. Almost imagine, for instance, that this is a bit of a consultancy situation where you might be coming in to pitch your idea to win a contract. Maybe there's 40 other people doing the same thing, and obviously you want to win their business. You've got to beat out the other 39 people, the other 40 people. So you have to be persuasive. You have to, convince them that your strategy, your new ideas are the best ones. Okay, so yeah. Kate's just asked, should you actually introduce yourselves? Because I just said, don't have to. No, don't need to. I think generally, imagining, again, if this was a real life business scenario, they're going to know who you are. They're going to know what you're there to talk about. So, no, I think if you start off fairly interestingly and jump in with a question, it's a really good way to get attention. If you feel like you want to start off with, hi, I'm Sarah and I'm here to talk about blah, 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 you can do that. I tend to believe that, capturing attention really quickly at the start and drawing them in is going to be more interesting and potentially more persuasive. But that's just one approach. All right, so I did say earlier, for most of you, you're going to be talking to like a CEO or Chief Marketing Officer. You could be talking to a board of directors. Who do you think that might be for your business? Because you all have different ones. So give us an idea now. Who do you think you're going to be talking to? And of course, we're just imagining here. So if you don't really know, you can just kind of have a bit of a guesstimation here. Maybe judging by, the size of the organization and so on. Okay, so got a few people saying, yeah, board of directors, but, it also says, some of you, have also said not always a board either. Sometimes it might be, obviously this one's a small business, maybe just a couple of owners. Your girlfriend sounds like she's like the owner of the business, yeah? Interesting. CEO and CFO, manager and other staff. Chiropractors, that's an interesting one. So I'm going to guess that they're the owners. Interesting. And look, I guess the reason I've brought this up is, depending on who your audience is, you have to remember, what do they want to know? You also have to keep in mind, you know, what industry you're in, which sets some expectations as well. And to a certain extent, I think if you're talking to people like chiropractors, they're going to be, I dare say, a little bit more methodical and perhaps less open to some creative presentation styles. So, hey, that's just my assumption. I could be completely wrong because all people are different, but I tend to think that if you're presenting to a marketing officer as opposed to a chiropractor, you're going to have a slightly different approach. So just use that information as you feel like it. But just remember, you're tailoring your presentation to these people. So tell them what they want to know. Right, so getting down to what are you going to say? Who here's had a look at the suggested structure in the Assessment 3 section? Which in fact I've just screenshotted right here for you. Oh, most of you have. To be honest, I was expecting a few of you to be like, nah, haven't even got that far. You know, I only just got over the other 2 assessments. Okay, so most of you have. Look, again, this is it's a suggested structure. You don't have to go into, obviously we don't have time to go into detail on every one of these dot points. However, I want you to strongly think about, as I said before, providing an overview on each of these and then making sure that all the pieces of that puzzle fit together. Because when we are marking your work, we're looking at, so how does what you say here link to what you've said here, which links to what you've said here. Okay, we just want to see that you do understand all of these basic marketing concepts and how they all fit together. And what you might notice is that the suggested structure that I just had on the previous slide, it actually in fact just kind of mimics exactly what we've been looking at the whole time throughout the course. Okay, and we're going to go through this in more detail shortly. In terms of the course content and the resources that I think you're going to find most helpful here, it really comes down to the concepts of understanding your customers, your target market, and then developing the 4 Ps that are best going to satisfy their needs and wants. So it really is all about the 4 Ps, which is modules 4 and 5, and also understanding your target market, which is module 3. So a bit of a tip here. Next week, in my email for module 6, I will say, of course, this week's content is supposed to be module 6. It's not going to be explicitly important for this assignment. So what you might consider next week is focusing on completing your assignment first before you tackle the week 6 course content. Having said that, week 6 is all about sustainability and global marketplace. So if those are concepts that are going to be relevant to your assignment, I wouldn't skip them. But for most of you, I think that, to be honest, you can probably afford to skip those next week and just put them on the back burner perhaps until after the course is over, and then still go and watch the videos because it's relevant content as marketers. It just, for most of you, won't add value to your presentation. So I'm just trying to save you a little bit of time. Alrighty, so let's talk about PowerPoint slides, because for most of you, it's going to be pretty important to the success of your presentation, as we saw earlier. And so many of you said earlier that having dodgy presentation slides can really detract from your presentation. So tell me, what do you think makes good PowerPoint slides? What makes good PowerPoint slides then? We had some hints earlier about too much text, maybe not enough images, but what else? Have a think about what else makes good PowerPoint slides. Give us some ideas. Alrighty. Some really good points. I'm going to go straight for my favourite one, which is right here in the middle. Support the point, don't make the point on your PowerPoint slides, which is a really good one, I think, because for you guys, you've got your PowerPoint, but you're also speaking as well. So obviously, you don't need the PowerPoint itself and the text on the PowerPoint to say everything. It's there to provide like backup information or images or graphs or tables or figures, as some of you have mentioned here. So it should support what you're saying, but not necessarily try to communicate everything. Yeah, that's a really good one. Eye-catching information, but not a lot of clutter. So really be mindful of white space, certainly on slides. What else have we got? Right up the top, don't mix and match colors, yes. Don't mix and match colors. Make sure that you do relate your colors to the brand or the business. If something makes sense, definitely. I like this one. Did you know? That's interesting. Actually, as we go through some of my later slides today, you'll see that there's a few like tips that I've put in there as well. Conversation starters. Video, yes, if you are skilled enough, definitely. You know, it's not always easy, but sometimes even these animations to reveal points. Yeah. What I've noticed is super simple for even people like me, is if you've got two slides where you copy the first slide and then you just make one small change onto the second slide, it looks like an animation when you change the slide, but obviously it's not. Because, hey, I'm, to be honest, not a great sort of a tech and creative person, so I keep things relatively simple, which is absolutely fine. So yeah, I think summarize what we've got here on the screen. Keep it simple. Don't overclutter. Use facts, figures, diagrams, graphs to support what you're saying, and keep the colors to a minimum. Make sure that the colors and fonts and things are fairly on brand, or they go with what you're trying to present. Now, a couple of tips from me, which is actually very similar to what I said for assignment 2. I did mention that Canva is awesome. So many of you use that for assignment 2, as I've started to see with the marking. But did you know you can actually create PowerPoint slides in Canva? So if you use the presentation format, it will give you all of those templates where you can make your PowerPoint slides look super professional. And as we know, you can use also the same stock images that I suggested last week. You can use any of those in your presentation, because again, it's going to help you give high definition images so that when you make them larger, it will look great. And of course, if you're using Canva to make your PowerPoint slides, then they've got lots of free stock images in Canva as well, which is super cool. But I really think if you create some basic slides in Canva that look really professional, and then you just go through and add to those, obviously with your text and a little bit more content, keep the coloring nearly the same throughout, you know, it's going to create quite a professional feel all the way through. So is there anything else that we haven't mentioned about making some great PowerPoint slides? Any other tips that you give your fellow students? I think we've nearly covered it all. I'm fairly confident that you'll do a pretty good job there, because of course it is covered in the rubric. So we want you to have some great slides that add value to your presentation. Right, but let's get down into the nitty-gritty of what you're actually going to say in your presentation. Right? Because yes, we want to have some great slides, but what's going to be on those slides? So as I said before, we're going to follow the general structure that's given on the course site. You can slightly deviate from that if you want. You can mix and match things, mix them up. So if you want to follow a different order that you think makes sense, that's fine too. Just a suggestion generally, because I think that usually this order works. It's kind of the marketing process. But if you want to, you know, change things up and be a little bit more creative, I'm always fine with that. Just make sure, of course, that it makes sense, and I would suggest running it past a couple of your friends or colleagues just to make sure that it does. But starting from the top, starting from the start, I think what you might want to do right at the beginning is just be really clear right at the start of your presentation what you're there for. So you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to do the really boring, "Hi, I'm Sarah and I'm here to talk to you about this idea today." But you might want to remind the board of directors or the owners right at the start what the problem is that you're there to solve. And, you might want to give some hints about what the solution includes. But you might also want to really quickly outline the goal. So you might say really boldly, "I'm here today to explain how you can increase your market share by 5% and solve the problem of blah, blah, blah." Just that really bold, sort of eye-catching statement right at the start could be enough to hook people in. So I guess just right at the beginning, just be really clear as to what is the context of the presentation, what is the point of the presentation, so that nobody's in any doubt as to what the next 4 minutes is going to cover. From there, what I suggest is to come up with a goal as to what your new strategy is going to achieve. So you only have to come up with one goal. We're going to keep it really simple. Again, we don't have a lot of time. We want to keep the presentation streamlined, and we also want to keep your marketing strategy streamlined as well. So just choose one goal, but my suggestion here is to make it SMART. So who here has heard of SMART goals before? Maybe if you have, tell us on the screen, what is a SMART goal? And maybe even tell us why you think we might use them. This is good teamwork on screen, by the way. You're like all coming up with... Great, great, great. And tell us who uses this in their business practice as well. I mean, to be honest, I know that we teach this in a few different management and marketing courses. It's a general sort of principle, but who's maybe used this in their own presentations, their own report writing and stuff? Okay, a few of you have. That's good. That's good. Believe it or not, I have read some, industry reports, even government reports, where they've set goals that were so vague, so broad, that they just hadn't really even considered this whole SMART concept at all. All right, so my suggestion is that whenever you do set a marketing goal, really do try to make it a SMART goal, not just for the purposes of passing this subject, but also because I think it really does make things a lot easier within a marketing team so that everybody's on the same ball about what it actually means, what you're trying to achieve. So if you've not heard of SMART before, it's just another acronym to add to the millions of acronyms we love in marketing and management courses. But basically, it stands for the fact that when we come up with a goal, we generally want every single goal to adhere to all 5 of these criteria. So we want our goal to be really specific, okay? Because if you have a very broad goal, it's open to interpretation, and you might know what you mean, but other people in your marketing team or other people in your organization are not necessarily going to interpret the goal in the same way. So as much as possible, you want to define what the goal means by using the who, what, where, when, why, and which kind of questions. So just really define the goal as much as you possibly can. Next up, we also want the goal to be measurable. And honestly, I think I would argue that this is probably the most important of these 5 parts of the acronym here. But basically, if you can't measure a goal, how are you going to know if you've achieved it? I mean, to give you a non-business example, probably a lot of us have thought to ourselves, oh, I need to lose weight. But until you really seriously sit down and come up with a really specific measurable goal, like, oh, I want to lose 5 kilograms in the next 3 months, then are you really being serious? Because anyone can say, yeah, I want to lose weight. Look, I wouldn't even call that a goal. I'd say it's a bit of an objective, but it's certainly not measurable. Until you put clear parameters around that and you know how you can measure that and how you can track that over time, then it's really not classified as a goal. So here we want to make sure that our goal is measurable, and honestly the quickest and easiest way is to just make sure that you include some form of numbers in your goal setting. I mean, it could be a percentage. You might say you want to increase or decrease something by X%. Some of you that might be coming up with sales goals might have a dollar figure in mind. I think generally though, percentage increases work quite well, because especially if this is a company that you don't know and maybe you don't work for, you don't need to know the starting figure. So you don't need to know what their existing sales are to increase sales by 5%. So that's kind of one way around that tricky issue as well. We do want our goals to be fairly attainable, or if you Googled SMART goals, you might also have it referred to as achievable. So obviously you don't want to aim too high, too low. It does need to be something that your team can achieve, perhaps with just a little bit of stretching beyond their usual comfort zone. Okay, so it needs to be reasonable, but we want it to be something that we're aiming towards. It does need to be quite relevant, and it needs to be a worthwhile goal. I mean, you want to make sure that, again, it's worth your team's time, or it's worth the business's time to achieve that. There's no point suggesting that they increase their sales by 10%, for instance, if mainly their focus is on increasing market share, because they're quite different goals. And another pretty important aspect of setting a goal is to set an end date, to know, when do you stop? When do you measure? So if you're setting a goal for this sort of marketing project, what I would say is maybe aim for that 12-month time period. Doesn't mean you can only measure at 12 months. You might want to measure, every 3 months, every month, to see if you're on track. But you need to know when you stop. When is the end date of the campaign? So I wouldn't aim too short, but I think 12 months is a good sort of medium term to be thinking about here. So all your goals should generally adhere to all of these SMART criteria. And when I say all of your goals, sorry, that was a bit of a misstep. Just remember, one goal is more than enough to define the direction of your presentation. So has anyone thought of any different goals of what you might be going to achieve? Some of you might be thinking financial goals. Maybe somebody's thinking non-financial. I'll just go to the next slide, give you some blank space if you want to have a write. Give us some ideas, and of course it's going to be different for every project because it's going to be really specific to the organization that you chose. Okay, so some very different ideas coming through on screen, which is great. I mean, if everybody was just trying to achieve the exact same goal, it would be fairly boring for me to read all of those assignments. So this is really good. What I would suggest, some of these goals that are or ideas, general directions that are coming through up here on screen, the next step for you will be to think about how do you rewrite that from a very broad objective into a really specific SMART goal. So like for instance, up the top, let's pick this one. So it was one of the first ones, so you were super quick. We'll pick your one. So here, one of the objectives of the organization might be to be more sustainable and financially viable. Good direction. right off the top of my head, sustainable can mean a lot of different things. So that's where I think, again, it's really useful to be very specific, because different businesses can be sustainable in different ways. But I think let's hone in on this idea of being financially viable. Again, quite a broad concept. Does that mean making a profit? Does it mean breaking even? Does it mean financially viable for the shareholders? So yeah, so I think you might see my point here about how we want to take a fairly broad idea and we want to just try to be as specific as possible and to really try to narrow it down so that there's not any subjectivity where different people are going to interpret it in different ways. Okay, so I'll give you some examples of if you were to write a SMART goal, how might that look? And this is how I love to keep it simple. Now I have chosen just to use the metric of sales. Again, keep it simple, we all understand it. It's fairly broad, can be applied for most businesses. But this goal that you can see in front of you in red is a goal that I would say is completely SMART. Probably could be more specific, you know, once you know which business it's going to be for and stuff, but it's already quite specific already. So my tip is, if you're designing a SMART goal, try to put it into one nice, neat little sentence so that you can add the SMART criteria in one sentence really quickly and easily. So here, the goal is to increase sales of, let's call it product X, by 5% in 12 months in Australia. So here it's narrowed it down by geography in terms of being really specific. It said which product we were trying to increase sales of. The metric here of sales is quite easily understood. It's definitely measurable because we've got the 5% element in there, and we know after what time period we can stop and we can measure it. So that'd be my suggestion, is to take your ideas and objectives that we just saw on the previous slide and have a go at rewriting them into one sentence like this and see if you can make it entirely SMART. And my suggestion again is to almost, you know, take this structure and just slot in your own words to make it fit. And if you want to post them in the Assessment 3 section on Teams, we can all give each other feedback. And of course, I'll be checking in and I can give you feedback on your goals up there as well. So try and rewrite your goal into this format, see how you go, and I can give you some feedback so that you know, it can be really measurable, it's super specific, it clearly identifies what the metric is and what the time frame is as well. Okay, so Ison's just asked a good question. He says, so Sarah, should this goal be the dream or a measurable step towards the dream, or could it be either? All right, so I'm going to guess that when you say the dream, we're thinking like super long term, like maybe 5-ish years, which in business is long term. Yeah, okay, cool. What I would do, Tyson, personally, is if I'm going to communicate that on a PowerPoint slide, I'd probably put both and just put like an arrow to make it clear that, hey, this is step 1 towards where you want to be in 5 years. Yeah, I think that's a good approach. Yeah. In terms of this assignment, I would be thinking sort of that 12-month mark. It's short to getting into medium term, I think. I think 12 months is sort of the good frame where we can start to think ahead, start to implement some of the changes you've suggested. It's enough time to let some ideas run in the market and see how responsive it is. Yeah, but I think if you have thought, Tyson, about, you know, what does the next 12 months do to help the long-term vision, that's quite good. It's very strategic thinking. So why not show that maybe on a timeline or something like that on your PowerPoint slide? That's good thinking. All right, so before we move on, sorry, are there any more questions about goal setting? Oh, Kristen says, so should we sort of go into a little bit more detail about like why the 5%? Hard question to answer, Kristen, because I think at the end of the day, obviously we want to know some things, but you know, I don't think that if I had 4 minutes, I'd probably spend it talking more detail about maybe the 4 Ps instead of justifying the 5%. Yeah, so I think maybe goals is something that you can relatively quickly and easily talk about in your presentation without too much justification. Yeah. I think actually the next couple of slides I was going to say is starting to move to talk about your marketing mix. That will be the main focus of your assignment. So it sort of answers a bit of your question. I would speak more about the 4 Ps than the goals. Miranda's got a good question again, which is, does that mean we just pick one strategy to achieve that goal? Yeah, generally. Yep. I mean, again, keeping it simple and keeping your presentation, your pitch streamlined. Identify, you know, one target market, identify one goal, identify one main strategy. Yeah, keep it as simple as possible, as streamlined as possible. I think if you're trying to cover too much, it just won't really come through in your 4-minute pitch. So if you can keep it fairly streamlined and just remember the main messages that you want your audience to remember, then that will probably communicate those ideas best. So the main focus of your assignment for most of you is going to be your 4 Ps. And I think it's important to think about here how each of the 4 Ps complements each other, but also that the 4 Ps are not really created equal, so to speak. I don't think that it's necessary for every person in every assignment to speak equally about each of the 4 Ps, which is kind of a bit of a frequently asked question I get on this task, which is, you know, should I cover just as much about each of them? Who thinks that maybe they might focus more on some rather than others? Like, you think maybe price might be a really important part of your strategy, more so than place. Yeah, maybe use the pointing tool. Tell us which one you think might be the most prevalent or most important to your strategy. Okay, interestingly, we've got quite a variety of different focuses, which is great. Really good. Definitely a new promotion is going to be a big focus for a lot of you, which is quite normal, I think, because you're trying to communicate new ideas to the customer. That does require promotional strategies. But yeah, if you're introducing a new product, then product is going to be probably your main focus. If you're introducing a new distribution system or trying to open a new store somewhere, for instance, then of course place is going to be more important. And price. Yeah, if you're going to suggest a pricing change, new pricing strategy, then yeah, certainly that will be your main focus as well. So that's not to say that you shouldn't talk about the other 3 Ps, but you know, it's absolutely okay if you spend most of your focus and most of your time on just one over the other. Okay, so don't feel like you have to cover everything equally. I think one thing I will be looking for though, when we do the marking, is seeing a really clear link between who your target market is and understanding who they are, and seeing that you've considered that in every choice that you make in the marketing mix. Because as we covered in Module 3, we looked at the fact that customers drive all of our marketing decisions. So if you link a lot of your marketing mix choices back to who your customers are and use that as your justification, then you'll do quite well. Okay, because that is one of the key takeaways from the whole course, which is that we design our marketing mix around who our customers are. So if you can show me that and you can communicate that quite well, and you can show me that you understand the link between our target market and our marketing mix, then that will be quite a big tick for you, definitely. So in terms of target market, we've already covered that off in the last assignment, but once again, just a quick reminder that really is the psychographic factors of your target market that usually provides the most hint about who these people are. So really do go beyond demographics and try to get in their heads. Like really try to understand who your customers are. What do they want? Keep the focus of your assignment quite narrow. Just think about one target market, and look, pretty much every business is going to have multiple target markets. But for each new marketing strategy, we would have one strategy that's clearly targeted towards usually one market. So we'll just have one market as the focus of your assignment and think about how your new strategy is going to satisfy them. So thinking about what drives them. What do they value in a product if product is going to be the main focus of your assignment? Think about what do they want, what do they need, what drives their decision making. Okay, and perhaps go back and watch some of the videos in Module 3 where we talked about target markets and customer decision making. All right, now this is quite a very busy slide, which totally goes against what I was saying earlier, doesn't it? I was just trying to communicate, I think on this slide, that there's going to be a lot of different factors that will influence the choices that you are going to make when you're designing your marketing mix. Okay, because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're designing a marketing mix to hopefully satisfy the needs and the wants of your customers. So some of the different things that might be influencing your decision and therefore you can use as justification could be what you found when you did the SWOT of the company in the last assignment. So if you know what their key strengths are and you want to capitalize upon that, then you can clearly suggest that as well. If you want to increase some of their weaknesses, again, might be something to mention. Think about what the goal is that you're trying to achieve as well. I mean, if you say that you're going to increase sales or increase profits, but then you tell me that you're going to decrease the price and not focus on driving volume, then that's obviously going to send a contradictory message. Think about what we teach you in the course content as well, and different theories that you might come across in some of the literature. Definitely really important here to start using the correct terminology. As this is the last assignment in the course, I guess the expectation is that we're starting to think that you've gotten through most of the course content, and that you should know most of the marketing concepts by now. So I guess the expectation of you using that terminology more correctly, sort of goes up there. Also, as justification for some of your marketing mix choices, you can clearly refer back to the micro and macro environmental analyses that you did in assignment 1. And so I know that a lot of you might have identified opportunities and gaps in the market that weren't already being satisfied. So if that's going to be part of your justification for why you've chosen to go down this new path, then say so. And certainly think about including some of those graphs and tables and figures, even if you included them in the report already, but you can put them on your slides. And really think about, though, if you do include graphs and tables, figures, those sorts of things, perhaps think about, circling certain sections of a table that you want the audience to pay attention to, or highlighting which part of a graph is the most important. Because you can't just necessarily expect the audience, i.e., your board of directors, you can't just expect them to know what they should be looking at if a slide's only up for 20 seconds as well. So just, I guess, be mindful of that if you're showing them a lot of information. And lastly, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, really consider, what does your customer want? What do they need? What motivates them? And I think that for most of you, that's going to be the biggest influence to what your marketing mix looks like. But all of these other factors as well are going to form part of your justification. So when you're sort of justifying your ideas, don't think that every justification has to come from theory, but all of these could be impacting upon your decisions, and likely are impacting upon your decisions. So some tips here. So when you're describing your new marketing mix, what that might look like, really hone in on the concept of value. And if you remember way back to week 1, it's even in the definition of marketing, delivering our customers value. So think about what is valuable to them, how are you going to deliver them value in your product, price, place, and promotion, in every step, basically. So in terms of delivering value in your product, you might think of what features does that actually include. Think of, how is your pricing strategy going to appeal to your customer? How does it provide value to your customer? But also balances that against what the company wants to achieve as well. Think about the value in your place strategy, probably in terms of how convenient that is for customers. So wherever you sell your product, hopefully is relatively convenient for customers, that they can access it at a time and a place that suits them. Building that convenience in as a form of value. And lastly, in terms of your promotions, think about what the message is that you're communicating to customers, and what kind of value are you communicating about your product or your service. And that message is quite important, because it should communicate that value to customers. If you want to, especially if promotion is a really big part of your assignment, like it's really important, you might even think about using some of the tools in Canva to do a mock-up. Kind of like what you did for assignment 2. I probably wouldn't spend as much time on it, because of course it was really important focus for assignment 2, not as important for the next assignment. But hey, those tools are available if you feel quite confident mocking up a promotion in Canva, and if it's relevant to your strategy, then certainly include that. Include some images. But I guess here, as you go through and you design your marketing mix, which is obviously going to be different for every one of you, just really hone in on that concept of value, making sure that you are delivering value to your customer in every one of the marketing mix elements. And try to be as specific as possible. But as I mentioned earlier when answering Kristen's question, I'm aware of the time limit. I know that you can't give us heaps of detail about everything, but in terms of detail and specifics, I thought I'd give you an example of what I mean over here on the left. Because really, the more specific you can be, it shows me that you understand something in more detail. If you're just using vague, sort of really broad statements, it shows me that you know a little bit about marketing, but it doesn't show me that you know all of these concepts in a lot of detail. So a way to demonstrate that you know the concepts is to correctly use the terminology, hint at the theory and the concepts that we've taught you in the course content. So you might say, for instance, a price of $3.99 per product illustrates how penetration pricing will be used to increase market share by 5% and still deliver a low price perception to customers. It's a bit of a wordy sentence, but it shows that you've got a very specific price. You've chosen like a recommended retail price. You've used terminology of penetration pricing here. You've hinted about how that actually achieves the goals of the company and how does that still deliver value to customers. So not all of your sentences, of course, have to be that wordy, but I think you get the point here that instead of using broad statements that, yeah, they hint that you know a bit about marketing, do try to be as specific as possible. That's how you can incorporate more detail in not too many words, or not, not rambling on for too long. And just remember that we are mostly focused on what matters to the customer, but we also know that the micro and the macro environments are going to influence some of these decisions. So don't be afraid to say that a key threat to this new strategy might be blah blah blah, and definitely be thinking about how you can capitalize upon any opportunities in that environment as well. Before we move on, are there any questions about anything you might talk about in the marketing mix sections? Any questions about marketing mix? Some of you might have noticed I've had my camera off most of tonight's class because the Wi-Fi doesn't seem to want to cooperate to that extent tonight. As I mentioned in my email earlier, I'm working from overseas for the next few weeks, so different Wi-Fi, unfortunately. All right, so moving on. No questions came up about marketing mix, but keep throwing them at me if you think of them. Next up, we're going to chat a bit about evaluation. Again, it won't be a big part of your presentation, but it is important to briefly mention because it really just focuses here on coming up with a marketing strategy on how you would measure the goals. I mean, there's no point setting some goals if you don't know how you're actually going to measure them. So having that plan in place of, in 6 months or 12 months down the track, how do we measure these goals is pretty important. So you might briefly want to mention in terms of goals is evaluation, which quite logically should link back to the goals that you set earlier. Now, for instance, one of the probably bigger problems or issues I would see here is that a student might say in the beginning that the goal is to increase brand awareness, but then here in the evaluation they might say that they're going to measure that as sales, which is incongruent. So just really make sure that what you're saying here in this section does relate back to the goals you set earlier. And think about how do you actually measure that. And depending on, of course, what you're measuring, there's going to be different metrics that you use. But what we're after here is just what is that key metric. So a really quick and easy example here is that if your goal was to increase sales, then your metric is sales. And you would usually measure that with sales figures. But not everybody is going to be sales oriented, as we mentioned earlier. So if I go back, have a quick look what kind of goals you were mentioning. So here we've got things like increased average transaction value. Well, that's really clear actually. That one's a really good metric. Awesome. Customer retention, that's a good metric as well. That's already quite self-explanatory. Awareness. This one's good. Obviously, it will need to be made a little bit more specific so that we know what we're measuring awareness of. But we measure awareness as a percentage. So, for instance, you might go and ask 100 people, are you aware of this new policy? Or have you ever heard of brand XYZ? You would measure that at the beginning, measure it again at the end, and hopefully you would see an increase. That's a very brief overview, by the way, of that form of market research, but just to give you an idea, we can certainly measure awareness, and it's just measured as a percentage. This one's an interesting one, only because off the top of my head I can't think of what you mean as a subcategory exemplar, but if you're using external market share stats, then obviously that can be measured, definitely. Here you go. If you're trying to attract new customers, your metric here could be, so you wouldn't measure this by sales as such, because sales itself wouldn't tell you how many people are existing and new customers. But if you have sales records, you have customer transaction records and things like that, then obviously you know how many are new and existing customers, so you can start to measure those things. But I think, oh right, sorry, I thought you were talking about within your specific industry. Okay, so I think you guys understand though, what I'm saying here is we want to be setting our SMART goals at the beginning so that we know that when we measure things, it is obviously easily measured. We know clearly what the metric is, and we would also know, at what point in time we stop and measure as well. So if you set a 12-month goal, then after 12 months we would measure. Although to be honest, you usually measure as you go, of course, so that you can take corrective action if things are not progressing very well. So my suggestion here is, if you're a little unsure as to how to evaluate, first step personally would be to do, believe it or not, a quick Google search to work out what the metric is. And if you're still unsure, post it up on Teams. Tell us what was the goal, and then tell us, hey, I think I would evaluate this in the following way. What do you guys think? And we can all provide you some feedback. And lastly, just briefly giving you some hints and tips on how to conclude your presentations. But again, I'm all for a bit of creativity here. I think the main thing is, you want to leave a lasting impression. You might want to finish by reiterating what the goal is or what you might achieve for them. And for some of you, especially if it's part of a longer term plan, as we heard earlier, if it's part of a longer term plan and you're thinking of, how does this fit into, the next 5 years, as Tyson said earlier, then yeah, you certainly might want to think about putting that into frame here. So talking about, okay, so this is step 1, the next step would be to blah, blah, blah. Or I guess just acknowledging the limitations, or, where to from here. But there's lots of different ways you can certainly conclude your presentations. I think the key really is just to leave a lasting impression. And if you are sort of competing with, let's say, 40 other consultants, you want them to remember you. You want them to remember the key messages of your presentation. So if you reiterate the key messages once again, it should be sort of stuck in their minds. So next couple of slides I'm going to chat about the rubric, but before we move on, are there any more questions in terms of content? Anything that maybe I haven't covered that you'd like to know? No? Okay. So I'll move on, chat about that super exciting topic of the rubric, giving you just a few hints and tips about how you'll be marked. How to sort of break down what is on the rubric, what does it mean. So for this assignment, there are 5 criteria, and so here's the first 3. The first 3 obviously are weighted most heavily. Okay, so 30%, 20, and 25 for these first 3. Really pay attention to, I think, not just what you're presenting, but how you're presenting the information as well. Okay, remembering that, what different things are weighted in the rubric is to what extent you should pay attention to them when you are designing your presentation. So for 30% of your mark, we're going to be judging you on your content knowledge. In other words, how much have you shown that you understand the concepts we've taught you, and how much can you apply that to your specific company. For the next 20%, we're going to be judging your PowerPoint slides, making sure that they're quite professional, if you've included graphs, charts, images, all of those that back up and enhance your presentation. So that's why I think it's really important to not rush the design of your PowerPoints, because it is weighted quite heavily. I mean, 20% is not to be sneezed at. So if you do a really quick rush job of PowerPoint slides with just black text, white background, no images, you're probably not going to do so well here. Next criteria, 25% really comes down to, again, how you're delivering your presentation. So your techniques, such as if you video yourself, we will count things like your posture, your gestures, eye contact, and how much you use notes. But for most of you, that's really going to be how you use your voice, which might suit you well, but it could also be a limitation. Some people are great on video, others not so much. In my experience, marking a lot of these pitches and presentations, most students are not great speakers. If you think about it, you know, you have to rehearse your presentation enough that you know what you're saying, but not too much so that you sound like, you know, you're over-rehearsed. It's maybe a good idea to have some notes in front of you so you know what you're going to say, but probably not too many notes where you've written it word for word and you're just reading off a script. So, you know, it's a good balance that you need to get here in terms of rehearsed but slightly spontaneous. And you also have to think about your tone of voice, how loudly you speak, so your volume, and maybe even adjust your mic accordingly. Thinking about your pace, how quick you speak. Some people speak really quickly. Some people speak really slowly, and I just marked a presentation a couple of days ago in another course where I had a student that just spoke so slowly, and it ultimately, you know, you could tell that she knew the content, but it made the presentation so boring. So for the particular part of the criteria where that got marked, you know, it was really detracting from the message she was trying to send. So thinking about how fast you're speaking, how slow you're speaking, and also maybe altering that throughout your presentation. So some parts of your presentation you might speak just a little more quickly, you know, to communicate enthusiasm. Also thinking about where you might pause, maybe even strategic pauses as well, to allow the audience to gather their thoughts and to also take in what you've just said. I mean, especially after you've made an important point, you might want to make a big pause to let that sink in. So all these things are important, and of course, if I'm not marking you on video, I really only have your voice to go by here. So, you know, I would suggest don't just submit the first recording you make. Have a couple of goes. Maybe have your friends and family listen back to it, and also consider submitting it to Smart Thinking as well for feedback. So those are the first three criteria, weighted most heavily. But for your last 25%, you also get marked on your language, so making sure that you're using the correct marketing terminology, which does link back to criteria 1, showing your knowledge. Making sure that you are persuasive, but you're still using business language. Like if you start off your presentation and say, "Hi everyone, great to see you guys, you're doing such a great job." You know, obviously it's going to detract from the message that you're here as a professional to present your ideas. So, yeah, making sure that we keep it professional, but also relevant for the industry as well. And the last 10% is for the structure and organization of your presentation. And here, I guess, just making sure it makes sense. So the suggested structure we've given you will make sense, If you start to move things around, that's fine, but just make sure again that it makes sense in terms of having an intro, a body, and a conclusion, making sure that you cover the main points, making sure that you keep to the time limit as well. If you go over, this is where we will penalize you. So these are all definitely things to be considerate of. So that's a brief overview of the rubric, but I do encourage you to take a detailed look online so that you understand what the differences are between what gets marked at excellent and very good and satisfactory and so on. Okay, because there are slight differences between each one, of course. And Aisha says, is there a grace time limit? No, it's a hard 4-minute limit for this assignment. Yeah, because you get to, it's not a live presentation where we might be a little bit more lenient, because you're submitting it online, like 1 second sort of thing is going to be the grace period. Yeah, we have to keep it pretty fair and equal, just like we do with a word limit. Because otherwise it's not fair if people go for 4 minutes 15 instead of 4 minutes, because to be honest, you can still communicate quite a lot of information in that 15 seconds, which might slightly make, a little bit uneven between students, and we can't have that, of course. Alrighty, so a few more tips. In terms of referencing, which nobody's asked about yet, I thought I'd quickly cover this. It does say that we suggest you have a reference slide as your last slide. Just list them all there. It doesn't have to be up for long. It can be the last second of your presentation. That's fine. Okay, but use a reference list as your last slide. You don't have to reference in the slides. So, in other words, there's no sort of in-text referencing. Okay? No, you don't have to speak to the list, Katie. In fact, you can say your conclusion while that's up if you wanted to. That's not a problem. I guess we just want to see that, yeah, you have referenced, yeah, definitely, so that we know where you got the info from. But yeah, you don't have to reference in your slides, and you certainly don't have to reference while you're speaking as well. So it's not like you have to say like, this image taken from Google in 2012 shows that blah, blah, blah. You don't have to speak like that. It can still be a normal business presentation, and then just the last slide, just show us the references. And yeah, also reference all the images that you use as well, as Tyson's just asked. Okay, so yeah, just really basic referencing, no in-text referencing, so to speak, and you don't have to submit your PowerPoint slides when you submit your assignment. So you can just submit the video. No need to include your PowerPoint slides or a script or a reference list or anything like that. But if you're still struggling with referencing, don't forget to use the referencing tool on the library side. Okay, Nick, interesting question. Nick said, so what's the average amount of slides and how much is too much? Average amount of slides. I don't know if there's a too much. I mean, if you've got a slide up for like 1-2 seconds, might not be long enough. But I also am quite a good believer in, if you had a slide like this, for instance, and then the next slide reveals the words, although now we've got all of your dot points and stuff on here. If you did a reveal like that, technically that counts as 2 slides because you've got a blank one and then you've got one with words. But I think that, yeah, I'm not sure there's too many. How many in a 4-minute presentation? I think I've seen anywhere from 4 slides. To be honest, I don't know if that's enough. Right through to 20, I think. Yeah. Nicholas has also said, so how long does the references need to air? Oh, just the last second is fine. Yeah, as long as I can see it right at the end, that's fine. Tyson says 1 slide, 4,000 animations. Yeah, I've seen that too, where you've got extra text boxes coming on top of extra text boxes and images and text boxes on top of that. Yeah. I know that there's especially if you've ever had to do it for an assignment, a Pecha Kucha presentation, where you have 20 slides each up for 20 seconds exactly, like that's the prescription that you have to follow. I've seen lots of animations in those presentations, but here I don't mind how you structure it. Yeah. Aisha's also asked, do we reference our assignment 1? No, you don't need to reference your assignment. If you take images from there, reference where they came from the first time. Yeah, so probably, and then you're using them again, it's still from Euromonitor, so I referenced that. And so what I've got up on this slide is a reminder that this is an oral presentation, but the great thing is you can still submit your presentation to Smart Thinking. So you can submit a video of your presentation, like a completed version. You can submit a script if you wanted feedback on that, although to be honest, I don't recommend having a full script because like I said earlier, it encourages you to read from it. But if you wanted to write something out for feedback, they would do that. And you can also just get feedback on your PowerPoint slides as well. And you might accompany that with some dot points or speaking points for each slide, or you could just submit the slides by themselves and say, hey, I want feedback on just the visual element. But the Smart Thinking team can give you feedback for this, which not a lot of people understand because they think, hey, it's not a written assignment, can't get feedback. But you can, of course. Now, if you'd like to meet up with me, we can have a Teams meeting this week, which is absolutely fine. The reason I'm only offering Teams meetings instead of like a phone chat, like I've mentioned previously, is that because I'm working overseas, I don't have a phone with me, so it will just be working online. And I guess just a note here, I don't expect you guys to ever work around me, that's not the point of this, but I probably won't be responding to you too quickly at some times of the day, just due to the time zone. So I'm actually working from LA at the moment. The conference is later this week. The time zone here is, it's currently 3:45 in the morning. So we're about 17 hours behind. So it's only just entering into Tuesday now. Okay. The first place I will be checking for questions, I'll check Teams more often than I will check emails because I have got Teams on my mobile phone. So even if I'm out and about, I will probably respond to you more quickly on Teams. So just try to post your questions there, and I will certainly get your emails at least once a day. But Teams will be the quickest place. Okay. But Teams meetings definitely available anytime you like. Okay. So we'll try to work out a convenient time that works for you. And I promise you, don't stress.